I stood at the auction podium watching my cousin Bradley raise the bidding paddle one final time, stealing the oceanfront Victorian home I had dreamed of owning since childhood. The auctioneer's gavel crashed down, and Bradley turned with a smirk that cut deeper than any family betrayal should. This house represented everything: my late grandmother's final wish, my chance to honor her memory, and my opportunity to build the future she always encouraged me to pursue. The salt air carried memories as I walked away from that courthouse steps auction, my hands trembling with rage and heartbreak. This wasn't just about losing a house. This was about losing the last piece of my grandmother, Sarah, the woman who raised me when my parents couldn't figure out how to stop destroying each other long enough to care for their son. Every summer from age 7 to 17, I spent my days in that weathered Victorian perched on the bluffs overlooking the Pacific. Grandma Sarah would wake me before dawn to watch the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. She taught me to identify different species of seabirds, showed me how to read the tide charts, and explained why the lighthouse keeper's quarters had been built exactly where they were. More importantly, she taught me that a home wasn't about the structure itself, but about the love and memories contained within its walls. After high school, I studied architecture specifically because I wanted to understand what made that house so special. The way the wraparound porch caught the morning light, how the tower room provided views in 3 directions, the careful positioning that protected it from winter storms while maximizing the summer breezes. Grandma Sarah used to say that whoever designed it understood the rhythm of the ocean, and she was right. When she passed away 2 years ago, I expected to inherit the house. Not because I felt entitled to it, but because she had told me countless times that it should belong to the grandchild who truly understands its value. I had assumed that meant me. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The legal complications started immediately. Grandma Sarah had died without a properly filed will, and the estate went into probate. My cousin Bradley, who worked as an investment banker in San Francisco, hired expensive lawyers and pushed through the inheritance process. I couldn't afford to fight him in court, not on an architect's salary while carrying student loans and trying to save every penny for a down payment. Bradley had visited that house maybe 5 times in his entire life. During family gatherings, he would spend the whole time checking his phone and complaining about the lack of cell service. He called it that old dump by the water and made jokes about how much money it would take to make it livable. Grandma Sarah used to watch him with sad eyes, hoping he would eventually understand what he was dismissing so carelessly. For 3 years after her death, I worked double shifts at the architectural firm, picking up every freelance project I could find. I designed strip malls and office buildings during the day, then went home to draft custom houses for wealthy clients at night. Every dollar went into my savings account marked for one purpose: buying back my childhood home when the estate finally went to auction. I had researched the property values, studied the market trends, and calculated exactly how much I could afford to bid. I thought I had enough. I thought Bradley would lose interest once he realized the house needed significant renovation work. I thought wrong. Standing on those courthouse steps after the auction, watching Bradley shake hands with the auctioneer, I felt something die inside my chest, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Bradley wasn't alone. He was talking to a man in an expensive suit, someone I recognized from the local newspaper's business section. Marcus Webb, a developer who specialized in luxury coastal properties. I moved closer, pretending to check my phone while straining to hear their conversation. 30 days from demolition permits to groundbreaking, Bradley was saying. The Historical Preservation Committee won't be able to stop us if we move fast enough. Perfect, Marcus replied. 3 luxury condos with premium ocean views will bring in triple what you paid for this place. Your grandmother's old house will make us both very wealthy men. The words hit me like physical blows. Bradley hadn't bought the house to live in it or even to preserve it. He was planning to demolish my grandmother's home within 30 days to build luxury condos, erasing 120 years of family history for a quick profit. I walked back to my truck on unsteady legs, my mind reeling with the scope of this betrayal. This wasn't just about money or property values. This was about destroying the last tangible connection to the woman who had saved my life when I needed her most. Bradley was going to tear down the kitchen where Grandma Sarah taught me to bake her famous blueberry muffins. He was going to destroy the reading nook where she helped me with homework and listened to my teenage problems. He was going to erase the tower room where she told me stories about our family's history and encouraged me to chase my dreams. As I drove home that night, something crystallized in my mind. Bradley thought he had won. He thought I would slink away defeated and let him destroy everything that mattered to me. But he had made one crucial mistake he had underestimated: just how far I was willing to go to protect my grandmother's legacy. And he had no idea that I knew exactly what he was planning to do. If Bradley wanted to play hardball, I was ready to show him what a real architect could accomplish when properly motivated. The next morning, I drove straight to the county recorder's office. If Bradley thought he could steamroll through this demolition without anyone noticing, he was about to learn otherwise. I pulled every document related to the property zoning records, environmental impact studies, historical surveys, and most importantly, information about the surrounding lots. What I discovered made my pulse quicken with possibility. The lot immediately adjacent to my grandmother's house had been sitting vacant for 8 years, tangled up in a complicated legal dispute between 3 different parties. The original owner had died, leaving conflicting claims from his ex-wife, his business partner, and a creditor who insisted the property had been used as collateral for an unpaid loan. While they fought in court, the lot sat empty, gradually returning to its natural state behind a chain-link fence covered in blackberry vines. I spent the afternoon walking the perimeter of that abandoned lot, taking measurements and photos. The property was roughly the same size as my grandmother's lot, with equally spectacular ocean views. More importantly, it sat on slightly higher ground, which meant any structure built there would naturally command the sightlines. That evening, I drove to the house next door to my grandmother's property, where Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had lived for 43 years. She was sitting on her front porch, as she did every evening, watching the sunset with a cup of tea and her ancient tabby cat. "Damon Williams," she called out as I approached. "I heard about what happened at the auction." "I'm so sorry, dear. Your grandmother would be heartbroken." "Mrs. Patterson, I was wondering if you could tell me more about that empty lot. Do you know anything about the legal situation?" Her weathered face brightened with interest. "Oh, that's quite a story. But first, there's something else you need to know about your cousin Bradley and that auction." She invited me onto her porch and poured me a cup of tea from her thermos. As the last light faded over the ocean, Mrs. Patterson began talking, and with each revelation, the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family began to crumble. "Your grandmother, Sarah, tried to file a proper will 3 months before she died," Mrs. Patterson began. "She came to me because she was having trouble with her lawyer, a man named Thomas Hartwell. She said he kept making excuses about why the paperwork wasn't ready, always asking for more time." My hands tightened around the teacup. Thomas Hartwell was Bradley's godfather, a family friend who had handled legal matters for my grandparents for decades. "Sarah was getting suspicious," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She told me she wanted you to inherit the house, and she was planning to drive to the city to find a new lawyer. But then she had her heart attack, and it was too late." "Are you saying Thomas deliberately delayed filing her will?" "I'm not saying anything definite, dear, but I will tell you this. The day after Sarah's funeral, I saw Thomas Hartwell and Bradley's father having a very intense conversation in that lawyer's car right out front of the house. They looked like they were arguing about something important." My mind raced through the implications. Bradley's father had died in a car accident when Bradley was in college, but before that, he had been involved in several questionable business deals. Family rumors suggested he had money problems and gambling debts. "There's more," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "About 6 months before your grandmother died, she found some discrepancies in her bank statements. Large withdrawals that she didn't remember making. She asked me to help her contact the bank because she was worried someone had access to her accounts." "What did you find out?" "The bank said the withdrawals were legitimate, made with her debit card and PIN number, but Sarah swore she never made those transactions. She was planning to file a police report when she died. The pieces were starting to form a picture that made me sick to my stomach. How much money are we talking about? Over the 2 years before she died, about $80,000? I set down my teacup with shaking hands. $80,000 was exactly the amount Bradley would have needed for the down payment on my grandmother's house at auction. Mrs. Patterson, you said my grandmother hid something before she died. What exactly did she hide? The elderly woman smiled mysteriously. Follow me. She led me around to the back of her property, where an old oak tree stretched its branches toward the ocean. Sarah came over here 3 days before she died carrying a metal box about the size of a shoebox. She was very weak, but determined. She dug a hole right here and buried it. Did she tell you what was in the box? She said it contained insurance. Insurance that the truth would come out someday and that the right person would know what to do with it. My heart was pounding as Mrs. Patterson handed me a small gardening spade. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to ask the right questions, Damon. I think it's time. We dug carefully in the soft earth beneath the oak tree. After about 20 minutes, the spade struck something metallic. I cleared away the dirt with my hands and pulled out a weatherproof document box, the kind lawyers use to store important papers. Inside, I found my grandmother's real will, properly signed and notarized, clearly stating that the house should go to me. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Beneath the will were bank statements, photocopied checks, and a detailed handwritten note from my grandmother documenting every suspicious transaction she had discovered. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Someone with access to my grandmother's banking information had been systematically stealing from her for 2 years before her death. The forged signatures were skillful, but not perfect. The timing of the withdrawals corresponded exactly with periods when my grandmother was hospitalized or recovering from medical procedures. But the final item in the box was what made everything crystal clear. A copy of a letter my grandmother had written to the district attorney's office dated 1 week before her death, requesting an investigation into Thomas Hartwell's handling of her finances and legal affairs. She never had the chance to mail it. As I sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch reading through the documents by the light of her porch lamp, I realized that Bradley's betrayal was even worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just about outbidding me at an auction. This was about a systematic theft that had been going on for years, involving both his deceased father and the family lawyer who was supposed to protect my grandmother's interests. Bradley had used stolen money to buy the house he was planning to destroy, and he had done it all while looking me in the eye and pretending to be the legitimate heir. But now I had proof, now I had leverage, and now I knew exactly what I needed to do to make this right. The question was whether I wanted justice or revenge. And sitting there in the darkness, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below, I began to understand that sometimes they might be the same thing. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the city to meet with a lawyer who specialized in estate fraud. Rachel Morrison had a reputation for taking on cases that other attorneys considered too complicated or risky. After reviewing my grandmother's documents, she agreed to take my case on contingency. "This is solid evidence of financial elder abuse," she said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "But proving it in court will take time, probably 18 months to 2 years. "I don't have 2 years, I told her. "Bradley is planning to demolish the house in 30 days. Then we need an injunction to stop the demolition while the estate is re-examined. I can file the paperwork this week. That would buy me time, but it wouldn't solve the larger problem. Bradley would fight the injunction with his expensive lawyers, and even if I eventually won, the legal bills would bankrupt me. I needed a different strategy, something that would give me leverage while the case worked its way through the courts. That afternoon, I drove back to the coast and parked across from the abandoned lot next to my grandmother's house. I sat there for 2 hours studying the property lines and calculating sight lines until a plan began to take shape in my mind. The legal dispute over the vacant lot was public record. I spent the evening researching all 3 parties involved in the ownership fight. The original owner's ex-wife lived in Florida and seemed primarily interested in selling her claim for cash. The business partner was facing bankruptcy and needed money to pay creditors. The creditor was a small bank that just wanted to recover their loan amount, plus interest. What if someone made all three parties an offer they couldn't refuse? Over the next week, I quietly approached each party through intermediaries. I hired a legal consultant to contact the ex-wife in Florida, offering her $20,000 for a quick settlement of her claim. I had an accountant reach out to the bankrupt business partner offering to assume his debts in exchange for his ownership stake. And I arranged for a financial advisor to propose a payment plan to the bank that would give them full recovery plus interest. The total cost would be approximately $150,000, which was exactly what I had saved for my down payment on grandmother's house. It would drain my entire savings, but it would give me ownership of the lot adjacent to Bradley's property. More importantly, it would give me the high ground in more ways than one. While my legal team worked on the lot purchase, I started designing. Not just any structure, but a very specific building that would serve multiple purposes. From the outside, it would look like a modest single-family home. From the inside, it would be a sophisticated architectural statement that maximized the ocean views for its own occupants, while strategically blocking those same views from the neighboring property. I spent sleepless nights calculating angles and elevations, designing a structure that would comply with all local building codes while casting the maximum possible shadow over Bradley's planned development. The key was a combination of height positioning and architectural features that would create a visual barrier without technically violating any zoning restrictions. Meanwhile, Bradley had started the demolition permit process for my grandmother's house. I watched from a distance as he met with contractors and city inspectors, obviously confident that nothing could stop his timeline. He had no idea that his architect cousin was working around the clock to outmaneuver him. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything. I was at the construction permitting office filing my own applications for the adjacent lot when I overheard a conversation between two city employees. That demolition permit for the old Victorian, there's a problem with the application. What kind of problem? Someone filed a historical preservation request. The Planning Commission has to review it before any demolition can proceed. My heart jumped. I hadn't filed any historical preservation request. Who else would want to protect my grandmother's house? I spent the rest of the day making phone calls and digging through public records. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The historical preservation request had been filed by Marcus Webb, the developer who was supposed to be Bradley's partner in the condo project. But according to the paperwork, Marcus wasn't trying to protect the house. He was trying to delay the demolition long enough to cut Bradley out of the deal entirely. I found more evidence in the business, filing records. Marcus had quietly incorporated a new development company and applied for separate construction permits for the same property. He was planning to force Bradley into a legal fight that would tie up the property for months, knowing that Bradley couldn't afford a prolonged court battle. But the most shocking discovery came when I cross-referenced Marcus's other business dealings. Over the past 5 years, he had been involved in similar schemes throughout the county, identifying properties with complicated ownership situations, then manipulating the legal process to acquire them for below-market prices. And every single one of those properties had been owned by elderly residents who died under suspicious circumstances. The pattern was clear and chilling. Marcus would identify elderly property owners with valuable real estate and complicated family situations. He would cultivate relationships with their lawyers, financial advisors, or family members, gradually gaining access to their financial information. Then, he would systematically drain their accounts while positioning himself to acquire their properties after their deaths. My grandmother wasn't his only victim. She was part of a pattern that stretched back years and involved dozens of families. I sat in my truck outside the city building staring at the evidence I had compiled, trying to process the scope of what I had uncovered. This wasn't just about family betrayal or property theft. This was organized crime targeting vulnerable elderly residents throughout the region. And Bradley was either a willing participant or a useful idiot being manipulated by someone far more dangerous than a greedy investment banker. Either way, I was now involved in something much bigger and more serious than a family dispute over a house. The question was whether I was brave enough to see it through to the end, or smart enough to know when I was in and over my head. As I drove home that night, I realized that the stakes had changed completely. This wasn't just about getting my grandmother's house back anymore. This was about stopping a predator who had been destroying families for years, using their own lawyers and relatives against them. I thought about all the other grandchildren who might be sitting in their truck somewhere, wondering why their beloved family members had died broke, and alone their property mysteriously transferred to strangers just before their deaths. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, Damon, but it's always worth doing even when you're scared. I wasn't just scared, I was terrified, but I was also angry enough to keep going. And I was starting to understand that my architectural training had prepared me for more than just designing buildings. It had taught me how to see the underlying structure of complicated systems, how to identify weak points, and how to design solutions that served multiple functions simultaneously. Marcus Webb and his network had been preying on isolated elderly victims for years. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had targeted a grandmother whose grandson was willing to fight back, smart enough to see the bigger picture, and stubborn enough to keep pushing until he found the truth. Now I just had to figure out how to use that truth without getting myself killed in the process. Within 2 weeks, my legal team had successfully negotiated the purchase of the abandoned lot. I now owned the property adjacent to my grandmother's house, and I had architectural plans approved for a structure that would completely block any ocean views from Bradley's planned condo development. Bradley realized what was happening the morning my construction crew arrived on site. I was standing next to the surveyor's equipment, double-checking the property lines, when Bradley's Mercedes pulled up with a screech of tires. He jumped out of the car, his face red with rage, wearing an expensive suit that made him look even more out of place at a construction site. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Damon?" "Building a house on my property," I replied calmly, not looking up from the survey map. "Same thing you're planning to do on your property." "Your property? How did you even afford this lot, and why are you building it right there?" He pointed at the foundation stakes, clearly understanding the implications. "It's the optimal location for ocean views and privacy. Basic architectural principles. You're doing this to spite me. You're trying to ruin my development project." I finally looked at him, and for the first time since the auction, I smiled. "Bradley, if your development project depends on views from my grandmother's property, then maybe you should have thought about that before you demolished her house." "I haven't demolished anything yet." "But you're planning to. 30 luxury condos with premium ocean views, right?" "That's what you told Marcus Webb." The color drained from Bradley's face. "How do you know about Marcus?" "I know a lot of things now, cousin, including where you got the money for your down payment." We stared at each other across the construction site, and I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. He knew that I knew. The question was what he planned to do about it. "Look, Damon, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. What if we worked together instead of fighting each other? I could cut you in on the condo project, equal partners." "I'm not interested in destroying our grandmother's house for money." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to transfer the deed back to me. I want you to admit what you and your father did. And I want you to help me stop Marcus Webb before he destroys more families." Bradley's expression shifted from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "You don't understand what you're getting involved in, Damon. Marcus isn't just some developer. He's connected to people who don't play games." "What kind of people?" Before Bradley could answer, a black SUV pulled up behind his Mercedes. 2 men in dark suits got out and walked toward us with the confident stride of people who were used to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Hartwell," one of them said to Bradley, "Mr. Webb would like to speak with you. Both of you." The fact that they knew my name sent ice water through my veins. I glanced at my construction crew, wondering if they would be any help if this situation went bad. The foreman was a 60-year-old veteran named Frank who looked like he could handle himself, but the other workers were college kids earning money for tuition. "I don't have anything to say to Marcus Webb," I told the suits. "Mr. Webb wasn't offering a choice," the second man replied. Bradley stepped closer to me and lowered his voice. "Just get in the car, Damon. If you try to run or cause a scene, it will be worse for both of us." As we were escorted to the SUV, I caught Frank's eye and made a subtle gesture toward my phone. I hoped he was smart enough to understand that if we weren't back in an hour, he should call for help. The drive took us 20 minutes inland to an office complex that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. We were led through a side entrance to an elevator that required a key card, then up to a suite on the 4th floor. Marcus Webb was waiting in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 45, with silver hair, and the kind of tan that came from yacht clubs and golf courses. He looked like a successful businessman, which made him more intimidating than if he had looked like a movie villain. "Damon Williams," he said, standing to shake my hand with a grip that lasted just a little too long. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your cousin has told me so much about your architectural talents." "I'm sure he has." "Please sit down. Can I offer you coffee water?" I remained standing. "I'd prefer to keep this brief." "Of course. You're probably wondering why I asked you here." "I know why I'm here. You're upset because my construction project is going to interfere with your condo development." Marcus laughed, and the sound was genuinely amused. "Oh, Damon, you think much too small. I'm not upset about your little house. I'm impressed." He walked to the windows and gestured for me to join him. "Do you see that residential development down there? I built that. The shopping center across the street, mine. The office park behind it, also mine. Congratulations. The point is, I don't worry about individual properties. I think in terms of entire neighborhoods, whole regions. Your grandmother's house was never about one development project. It was about establishing a foothold in a market that's about to explode." He turned back to face me, and his expression had shifted from friendly to calculating. "The state is planning a new highway extension that will cut travel time to the coast by 30 minutes. Property values in your grandmother's area are going to triple in the next 5 years. I'm positioning myself to control that growth. Through fraud and theft. Through strategic partnerships and careful planning. Your cousin Bradley has been very helpful in identifying properties with complicated ownership situations. His banking connections give him access to financial information that most developers never see." I looked at Bradley, who was sitting at the conference table staring at his hands. "So, you're admitting that you've been targeting elderly property owners?" "I'm saying that I've been providing solutions for families dealing with complex estate issues. Sometimes those solutions involve purchasing properties that might otherwise sit vacant for years, while lawyers get rich fighting over probate. And if the elderly owners happen to die before they can change their wills or report financial irregularities." Marcus's smile didn't change, but his eyes went cold. "That's a serious accusation, Damon. I hope you have evidence to support it." "I have evidence of systematic financial theft from my grandmother's accounts. I have evidence that her will was deliberately withheld from probate. And I have evidence that you've been involved in similar schemes involving dozens of properties." "Interesting. May I see this evidence?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus was calling my bluff, betting that I wouldn't have brought the original documents to a meeting like this. He was right, but not for the reason he thought. "The evidence is in a safe place," I said carefully, "along with copies that have been distributed to several people with instructions to contact the authorities if anything happens to me." "Of course. Very prudent." Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down. "Which brings us to the real reason you're here. I'd like to offer you a partnership." "A partnership in what?" "In legitimate development projects throughout the region. You're obviously an intelligent young man with architectural training and research skills. I could use someone like you on my team." "Someone like me?" "Someone who understands that individual properties are less important than market trends. Someone who can see the bigger picture." I realized that Marcus was offering me the same choice he had probably offered Bradley years ago: join the conspiracy or fight it alone. Bradley had chosen cooperation, either because he needed the money or because he was too scared to refuse. What happens if I'm not interested in your partnership? Then you continue building your little house, and I continue with my development projects, and we stay out of each other's way. Your grandmother's property becomes a condo development. Your house blocks the ocean views, and everyone loses money. Meanwhile, I focus my attention on more profitable opportunities. And my evidence of financial fraud becomes a civil matter between family members that will take years to resolve in court, assuming you can afford the legal fees. Marcus was essentially offering me a deal: accept his partnership and drop the fraud investigation, or fight him in court while he destroyed my grandmother's house and moved on to victimize other families. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He assumed I cared more about money than justice, more about winning than being right. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long. The demolition permits for your grandmother's house will be approved next week, and construction moves quickly once it starts. As Bradley and I were escorted back to the SUV, I caught sight of something that made my blood freeze. In the parking garage, I recognized two vehicles: Thomas Hartwell's Mercedes and a county sheriff's patrol car. Marcus Webb wasn't just connected to crooked lawyers and greedy relatives. He had law enforcement in his pocket. During the drive back to the construction site, Bradley finally broke his silence. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Damon. Marcus has connections you can't imagine. Judges, prosecutors, county commissioners, police chiefs. If you try to fight him, you'll lose everything. So you decided to join him instead? I decided to survive. After my father died, I found out about the money he had taken from Aunt Sarah. I tried to pay it back, but Marcus found out about the irregularities and threatened to expose everything unless I helped him identify other properties. So, you've been helping him target elderly victims for years. I've been giving him information about properties that were going to end up in probate anyway. I told myself I was just providing market research. And the money you used to buy grandmother's house? Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Marcus loaned it to me, at a very high interest rate. If I don't make this condo development work, I'll lose everything I own. I stared at my cousin, finally understanding the scope of his predicament. Marcus had used Bradley's father's theft to gain leverage over him, then trapped him in a cycle of debt and complicity that made escape impossible. Bradley, what if I told you there was a way out of this? A way to stop Marcus and clear your father's debts without destroying grandmother's house? I'd say you're either naive or crazy. Marcus doesn't lose. Ever. Maybe he's never faced an architect before. As we pulled back into the construction site, I was already formulating a new plan. Marcus thought he was dealing with a grieving grandson who wanted to save his family's house. He had no idea he was facing someone who had spent 3 years learning how to design complex systems that served multiple functions simultaneously. But first, I needed to make sure my construction crew was safe. My evidence was secure, and my legal team was prepared for what was coming next. Because I was about to declare war on a criminal organization that had been operating with impunity for years. And I planned to use everything I had learned about structural engineering to bring their entire operation crashing down. That evening, I met with my lawyer Rachel Morrison at her office downtown. I brought Bradley with me despite his obvious reluctance to get involved in anything that might anger Marcus Webb. Your cousin is right to be scared, Rachel said after reviewing the information about Marcus's organization. What you're describing sounds like a sophisticated criminal enterprise with significant political connections. This is beyond the scope of estate fraud. So, what are my options? You need federal involvement. The FBI has a task force that specializes in organized crime targeting elderly victims, but they'll need substantial evidence and a witness willing to testify. I looked at Bradley, who was sitting in the corner chair looking like he wanted to disappear. Are you willing to testify about what you know? If I testify against Marcus, I'll be signing my own death warrant. If you don't testify, you'll be complicit in ongoing crimes against elderly victims. How many more families have to be destroyed before you find your courage? Rachel intervened before our argument could escalate. There might be another option. If we can document Marcus's current operations in real time, the FBI might be able to build a case without requiring Bradley's testimony until later. What kind of documentation? Recordings of conversations, financial records, evidence of coordination between Marcus and corrupt officials. Basically, we need to catch them in the act. I spent the drive home thinking about the logistics of such an operation. Recording conversations would require getting close enough to Marcus's organization to observe their activities, which would be extremely dangerous. But it might be possible if I pretended to accept his partnership offer. The next morning, I called Marcus's office and scheduled a meeting to discuss his proposal. I spent the afternoon preparing for what would essentially be an undercover operation, equipping myself with a small digital recorder and rehearsing the kinds of questions that might elicit incriminating responses. But when I arrived at Marcus's office complex that evening, I discovered that the situation had changed dramatically. The parking lot was full of police cars and unmarked federal vehicles. FBI agents in tactical gear were escorting Marcus and several of his associates out of the building in handcuffs. Thomas Hartwell was among them, his expensive suit rumpled and his face pale with shock. I parked across the street and watched the arrests with a mixture of relief and confusion. Someone else had beaten me to the punch. But who? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, "Coffee shop on Main Street. Come alone, Eleanor." Mrs. Patterson was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, looking nothing like the fragile elderly neighbor I thought I knew. She was wearing dark clothes instead of her usual floral dresses, and her posture was alert and confident rather than frail. "Sit down, Damon," she said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." "Mrs. Patterson, what's going on? How did you know about the arrests?" "Because I've been investigating Marcus Webb and his organization for 3 years. I stared at her, trying to process this information. "You're not really just a neighbor, are you?" "I'm a retired FBI agent. I moved next to your grandmother's house because we suspected she was being targeted by a criminal organization that specializes in elder abuse. I was supposed to protect her." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. "You were there to protect her, but she died anyway." "She died before I could gather enough evidence to prosecute the people responsible. I've been waiting for an opportunity to finish what I started." "So you've been watching me since grandmother's funeral?" "I've been watching your cousin Bradley and his connections to Marcus Webb. When you started investigating the property records and asking questions about your grandmother's finances, I realized you might be the key to exposing their entire operation." Mrs. Patterson opened a briefcase and pulled out several thick folders. "For 3 years, I've been documenting Marcus's crimes. Property theft, financial fraud, bribery of public officials, and, in at least 2 cases, suspicious deaths that might have been murders. Murders. Elderly property owners who were about to change their wills or report financial irregularities. They died suddenly from apparent heart attacks or accidents, always just before they could take action that would have exposed the conspiracy." I thought about my grandmother's heart attack and felt sick. "Do you think grandmother was murdered?" "I think her death was convenient for people who needed her to die before she could file criminal charges. But I can't prove it was anything other than natural causes." "So, what happens now? Marcus has been arrested, but does that end the conspiracy?" Mrs. Patterson's expression darkened. "Marcus was middle management. The arrests tonight were just the beginning. We've identified at least 12 people in county government who were taking bribes to expedite property transfers and suppress investigations. The real organizers are still out there." "What do you mean, real organizers?" She opened another folder and spread photographs across the table. I recognized some of the faces: county commissioners, judges, the sheriff, whose car I had seen in Marcus's parking garage. This conspiracy goes all the way to the top of county government, Damon. Marcus was just the operational manager. The people who designed this system are still in power, and they're going to try to eliminate anyone who can connect them to the crimes. Including me. Including both of us. which is why we need to work together to finish this. I looked around the coffee shop, suddenly paranoid about who might be watching us. What exactly are you proposing? The FBI has been building a case against the political corruption, but we need evidence of ongoing criminal activity to make charges stick. Marcus's arrest will cause the organization to panic and make mistakes. If we can document those mistakes, we can bring down the entire network. And if we can't, then they'll reorganize, find new operational managers, and continue targeting elderly victims throughout the region. Your grandmother's death will have been for nothing. Mrs. Patterson was right, but the scope of what she was suggesting terrified me. Going up against Marcus Webb was dangerous enough. Going up against corrupt county officials with law enforcement connections was potentially suicidal. There's something else you need to know, she continued. Your cousin Bradley wasn't just a victim of this conspiracy. He was an active participant. The FBI has recordings of him providing Marcus with confidential banking information about elderly clients. But he said he was being blackmailed. He was being blackmailed, but he also profited from the crimes. Bradley received commission payments for every property that Marcus acquired through his information. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Everything I thought I understood about Bradley's involvement was more complicated than I had realized. So what happens to him? That depends on whether he's willing to cooperate with the federal investigation. If he testifies against the corrupt officials, he might avoid prison. If he refuses, he'll be prosecuted as a co-conspirator. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Bradley. I looked at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded for me to answer. Damon, where are you? Marcus has been arrested and his lawyers are calling me. They're saying I need to get rid of any evidence that connects me to his organization. Where are you now? At the house. Grandmother's house. I'm supposed to meet someone here in an hour to hand over documents, but I'm scared. I think they're planning to kill me to keep me quiet. I looked at Mrs. Patterson, who was already reaching for her phone. Bradley listened to me carefully. Do not hand over any documents. Do not meet with anyone. And whatever you do, do not try to run. What am I supposed to do? Trust me, help is coming. I hung up and turned to Mrs. Patterson. How long before you can get federal agents to that house? 20 minutes if we're lucky, 40 minutes if we're not. That's not fast enough. Someone is going to kill my cousin in an hour, and despite everything he's done, I can't let that happen. Mrs. Patterson studied my face, and I could see her weighing the risks of what I was suggesting. You're thinking about going there yourself, aren't you? I'm thinking that Bradley is the only person who can testify about the banking information and the commission payments. If they kill him, the case against the corrupt officials falls apart. And if they kill both of you, the case falls apart anyway. Not if you're coordinating with the FBI to document everything that happens. We stared at each other across the coffee shop table, and I realized that Mrs. Patterson was making the same calculation. Sometimes the right choice was also the most dangerous choice. Give me 5 minutes to contact my handler, she said. Then we'll both go get your cousin. As she made her phone calls, I sat in that coffee shop thinking about how much had changed since the morning I lost the auction for my grandmother's house. What had started as a family dispute over property had become a federal investigation into organized crime and corruption. But in a strange way, it felt like exactly what my grandmother would have wanted me to do. She had always taught me that family loyalty meant protecting the people you loved even when they made mistakes. Especially when they made mistakes. Bradley had betrayed our family and participated in crimes against elderly victims. But he was also being manipulated by criminals who had more power and experience than he could handle. If there was a chance to save him while also serving justice, I had to try, even if it killed us both. Mrs. Patterson and I drove to my grandmother's house in her sedan, which was equipped with FBI communication equipment disguised as a normal car radio. She wore a wire, and I carried a backup recording device in my jacket pocket. The federal agents are 15 minutes behind us, she said as we pulled into the driveway. Our job is to keep your cousin alive and document whatever happens until they arrive. The house looked different in the evening light. Marcus's demolition crew had stripped away some of the exterior trim and scaffolding covered the front porch. Seeing my childhood home partially destroyed made my chest tighten with grief and rage. Bradley was waiting on the porch, looking terrified and exhausted. He jumped up when he saw us approaching. "Damon, what is she doing here? Who is this woman?" "Eleanor Patterson is a retired FBI agent, Bradley. She's been investigating the people who killed our grandmother." "Grandmother died of a heart attack." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "Your grandmother died after someone drugged her evening tea with digitalis, a heart medication that's lethal in large doses. The autopsy missed it because the symptoms are identical to a natural heart attack, and no one thought to test for it." Bradley stared at her in horror. "You're saying someone murdered Aunt Sarah?" "I'm saying someone needed her to die before she could file criminal charges, and her death was very convenient for people who were stealing her money." "But who would do that, and why?" Before Mrs. Patterson could answer, headlights swept across the driveway. A black SUV pulled up behind our car, and two men got out. I recognized them as the same men who had escorted Bradley and me to Marcus's office. "Mr. Hartwell," one of them called. "We're here for the documents." Mrs. Patterson moved subtly to position herself behind the porch railing, speaking quietly into her wire. "Federal agents, we have two subjects approaching the residence. Request immediate backup." I stepped forward to meet the men trying to buy time. "Gentlemen, there's been a change of plans. My cousin has decided to cooperate with federal investigators instead." The taller man smiled coldly. "I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Williams. Your cousin has documents that belong to our organization. We're here to collect them." "What documents?" Bradley spoke from behind me, his voice shaking. "Banking records, client lists, property assessments. Marcus wanted me to keep copies of everything in case we needed leverage against the officials who were helping us." "So, you have evidence of the bribes and corruption?" "I have evidence of everything." The second man reached inside his jacket, and Mrs. Patterson emerged from behind the railing with a pistol drawn. "Federal agent, keep your hands visible." The situation escalated quickly after that. The two men drew their own weapons. Bradley dove for cover behind the porch stairs, and I found myself in the middle of a standoff that could turn deadly at any moment. "Mrs. Patterson," I said loudly, hoping my voice would carry to the FBI communication equipment, "these men are here to eliminate witnesses who can testify about corruption in the county government, aren't they?" "That's correct, Damon. They work for Commissioner Janet Reeves and Judge Harold Morrison, who have been taking bribes to facilitate property theft throughout the region." One of the gunmen laughed harshly. "You think naming names is going to save you? This investigation dies tonight along with everyone who knows too much." "Actually," Mrs. Patterson replied, "this investigation expanded tonight. Marcus Webb has been cooperating with federal agents for the past 6 hours. He's already given us detailed information about the bribes, the murders, and the property theft conspiracy." I could see doubt creeping into the gunmen's expressions. They hadn't expected Marcus to cooperate, and they weren't sure how much the FBI already knew. "You're bluffing," the taller man said, but his confidence was wavering. "Am I? Then why don't you call Commissioner Reeves and ask her why FBI agents raided her office 2 hours ago?" The gunman pulled out his phone and made a quick call. From his expression, I could tell that Mrs. Patterson wasn't bluffing. The federal investigation was already in motion, and the corrupt officials were being arrested. But that just made our situation more dangerous. If the conspiracy was collapsing, these men had nothing left to lose. "It doesn't matter," the second gunman said. "Dead witnesses can't testify." He raised his weapon toward Bradley, but before he could fire, the night erupted with flashing lights and sirens. 3 FBI vehicles surrounded the property, and armed agents emerged with tactical gear and spotlights. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The standoff lasted another tense minute before both men surrendered. As they were being arrested, I heard one of them talking on his radio, apparently trying to warn other members of the conspiracy that the operation had been compromised. Mrs. Patterson holstered her weapon and walked over to where Bradley was still crouched behind the stairs. "Mr. Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. but the federal prosecutor has authorized me to offer you a cooperation agreement. If you're willing to testify about the banking irregularities and the commission payments, you can avoid prison." Bradley looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just needed money to pay back what my father had stolen, and Marcus made it seem like a legitimate business opportunity." "Your father didn't steal from your grandmother," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "Marcus and his organization stole from her using your father's banking access. They've been using family members to gain access to elderly victims for years." The revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow. "My father wasn't a criminal. Your father was another victim. Marcus's people identified him as someone with gambling debts and access to banking systems. They used his desperation to turn him into an unwilling accomplice, then killed him when he tried to stop cooperating." I stared at Mrs. Patterson. Bradley's father was murdered too. Car accidents are easy to arrange when you have connections in law enforcement. Your father's death wasn't random, Mr. Hartwell. It was an execution disguised as a traffic accident. As the FBI agents processed the crime scene and arrested the gunman, I walked through my grandmother's partially demolished house one last time. The kitchen where she taught me to bake had been gutted. The reading nook where we spent summer afternoons was filled with construction debris. The tower room where she told me stories about our family's history was empty and echoing. But something had changed in the way I saw the destruction. This wasn't just about losing a house anymore. This was about exposing a criminal organization that had been destroying families for years. My grandmother's death had been the catalyst for bringing justice to dozens of other victims. Mrs. Patterson found me standing in the empty living room looking out at the ocean through the stripped windows. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow," she said. "Your cousin's testimony will be crucial for convicting the corrupt officials. But your investigation provided the foundation for everything that happened tonight. What happens to the house? That depends on what you want to happen. Bradley is transferring the deed back to you as part of his cooperation agreement. You can rebuild it, or you can sell it, or you can turn it into something completely different." I thought about the community center. I had envisioned a place where families could gather and elderly residents could find support and protection from predators like Marcus's organization. I want to create something that would make my grandmother proud, something that prevents other families from going through what we went through. I think she would like that very much. As we walked back to her car, Mrs. Patterson handed me a small box that I recognized as my grandmother's jewelry case. "I found this hidden in her bedroom closet when I was investigating her death. She left something for you." Inside the jewelry case was a handwritten letter dated 1 week before my grandmother's death. "My dearest Damon, if you are reading this, it means that something has happened to me before I could see justice done. I know that people have been stealing from me, and I suspect they might try to hurt me to keep their secrets. But I also know that you have the strength and intelligence to finish what I started. The house was never the most important thing. The love we shared there, the memories we created, the values we learned from each other, those are what matter. Use whatever resources you have to protect other families from the people who tried to destroy ours. I am proud of the man you have become, and I know you will do the right thing even when it's difficult. All my love, Grandmother Sarah." Reading her words in that empty house, I finally understood what she had been trying to teach me all those years. Family wasn't about property or inheritance. It was about protecting the people you loved and standing up for what was right, even when the cost was higher than you wanted to pay. Bradley was going to face serious consequences for his involvement in the conspiracy, but he was also getting a chance to make amends by helping to convict the people who had manipulated him. The corrupt officials who had enabled Marcus's crimes were going to prison, and the criminal organization that had been targeting elderly victims throughout the region was finally being dismantled. My grandmother's death had not been in vain. Her courage in documenting the theft and her determination to seek justice had made all of this possible. Now it was time to build something worthy of her legacy. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where my grandmother's house had once overlooked the ocean, but everything was different now. The Victorian mansion had been carefully restored, using the original architectural plans and vintage materials. The tower room once again provided views in 3 directions. The wraparound porch caught the morning light exactly as my grandmother remembered. But adjacent to the restored house, connected by a glass walkway, stood a modern community center designed to serve elderly residents throughout the county. The Sarah Williams Center for Elder Protection offered legal services, financial counseling, and social programs for seniors who might be vulnerable to fraud or abuse. Mrs. Patterson, whose real name was Eleanor Kellerman, served as the director, using her law enforcement experience to identify and prevent crimes targeting elderly victims. Bradley stood next to me on the restored porch wearing work clothes instead of his expensive suits. He had served 8 months in federal prison as part of his plea agreement, then returned to town to help manage the community center. His banking background proved invaluable in teaching seniors how to protect themselves from financial fraud. The last of the appeals was rejected this morning. He told me, holding up his phone. Commissioner Reeves got 15 years. Judge Morrison got 12. Thomas Hartwell got 10 years and disbarment. What about the other officials? Everyone who took bribes from Marcus's organization is going to prison. The FBI task force identified corruption in 4 different counties. This case broke open criminal enterprises we never even knew existed. The prosecutions had taken months to complete, but the results were comprehensive. Marcus Webb himself received a 25-year sentence for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The corrupt officials who had enabled his crimes lost their positions and their freedom. Most importantly, the illegal property transfers were reversed and dozens of families received compensation for what they had lost. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the community center carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of floral dress I remembered from when I thought she was just a sweet, elderly neighbor. "The county supervisors approved our expansion proposal," she announced. "We're getting funding to add a satellite office in the northern part of the county, and 3 more law enforcement agencies have requested training on elder abuse investigation techniques. Any new cases this week?" 2 attempted property scams that we caught early, and 1 family that discovered suspicious activity in their elderly father's accounts. But because of the publicity from your grandmother's case, people are more aware of the warning signs. The publicity had been intense but ultimately positive. When the full scope of the conspiracy became public, dozens of other families came forward with similar stories. The pattern of targeting elderly property owners was so widespread that the state attorney general's office created a special task force to investigate elder abuse throughout California. My cousin and I walked down to the beach behind the house, following the same path my grandmother and I had taken countless times during summer visits. The ocean looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. "Do you think she would have forgiven me?" Bradley asked as we reached the water's edge. "I think she would have been proud of what you've done to make things right. She always said that courage wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about finding the strength to fix them." I still think about my father sometimes, wondering what he would have done if he had known how deep the conspiracy went. He tried to stop cooperating with them, and they killed him for it. That tells me everything I need to know about his character. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the rocks where my grandmother used to collect shells and drift wood for her garden projects. The lighthouse in the distance was still operating its beams, sweeping across the water every 30 seconds, just as it had throughout my childhood. "I have something for you," Bradley said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I found it in my father's safe deposit box after the trial. It's a letter he wrote before he died." The letter was addressed to my grandmother, but never sent. "Dear Sarah, I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. The people I borrowed money from turned out to be more dangerous than I realized, and they're using my banking access to steal from you and other elderly clients. I've been trying to find a way to stop them without getting myself or my family killed, but I don't think that's possible. I'm going to try to pay back every dollar they stole from you, even if it takes the rest of my life. I know that doesn't undo the betrayal, but I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. If something happens to me, please don't blame Bradley. He doesn't know anything about this, and I want to keep it that way. I'm sorry for everything. Your nephew, Robert. Reading the letter, I finally understood the full tragedy of what Marcus's organization had done to our family. They hadn't just stolen money and property. They had turned family members against each other, creating suspicion and resentment where there should have been love and support. Your father was trying to protect everyone, including my grandmother, I told Bradley. He was caught between impossible choices. I wish I had been brave enough to make the right choices from the beginning. You were scared and manipulated by people who had been running these schemes for years. The important thing is that you found your courage when it mattered most. As we walked back toward the house, I thought about how many lives had been changed by the events of the past year. Marcus's criminal organization was dismantled. Corrupt officials were in prison. Families who had lost property to fraud were receiving compensation, and elderly residents throughout the region now had resources to protect themselves from similar crimes. But perhaps the most important change was the restoration of trust between Bradley and me. The conspiracy had used our family's secrets and mistakes to drive us apart. Working together to expose the truth had brought us back together in a way that felt stronger than before. Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the porch when we returned, talking on her phone with someone from the FBI task force. When she finished the call, she walked over with a satisfied expression. That was Agent Morrison in Sacramento. They've identified similar elder abuse conspiracies in 3 other states, all connected to people who used to work with Marcus Webb. Your grandmother's case is becoming a model for how to investigate and prosecute these crimes. She would have loved that, I said. She always believed that standing up to bullies made it easier for other people to do the same thing. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and crimson that I remembered from childhood mornings with my grandmother. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, steady and reliable, a beacon for travelers trying to find their way safely home. Looking at the restored house and the community center that honored my grandmother's legacy, I realized that we had accomplished something much more important than winning a property dispute or seeking revenge against the people who had wronged us. We had created something that would protect other families from the kind of predators who had targeted our grandmother. We had built a system that would help elderly residents maintain their independence and dignity while staying safe from fraud and abuse. Most importantly, we had proven that ordinary people could fight back against organized crime and corruption, even when the odds seemed impossible. The fence that I had originally planned to build between the properties was never constructed. Instead, the restored house and the community center were connected by gardens and walkways that encouraged interaction between residents and visitors. The ocean views were shared by everyone who came to learn about elder protection or to receive help with legal and financial problems. Bradley had moved into a small apartment above the community center, dedicating himself full-time to the elder protection work. His banking expertise and his personal experience with financial fraud made him uniquely qualified to help other families recognize and prevent similar crimes. Mrs. Patterson had become a surrogate grandmother figure for both of us, using her law enforcement background to train a new generation of investigators who specialized in crimes against elderly victims. And I had discovered that my architectural training was perfectly suited for designing not just buildings, but systems that served multiple functions and protected vulnerable people from those who would exploit them. As we gathered on the porch for our weekly planning meeting, discussing new cases and expansion opportunities, I thought about the question my grandmother used to ask when I was struggling with difficult decisions. What kind of person do you want to be when this is over? Looking at the work we were doing together, honoring her memory while protecting other families from the crimes that had been committed against her, I knew that we had found the right answer. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about getting what you originally wanted. They're about discovering what you were really fighting for all along. And sometimes the best way to heal from betrayal is to work together with the people who hurt you, transforming shared pain into shared purpose. My grandmother's house had been restored, but more importantly, her values had been preserved and expanded. The love and protection she had given to me was now being offered to elderly residents throughout the region. Her courage in documenting financial theft had become a model for other victims to follow. Her determination to seek justice had resulted in the dismantling of a criminal organization that had been destroying families for years. Standing on that porch, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the ocean, I could almost hear her voice carried on the evening breeze. "Well done, my dear boy. Well done." What started as a family feud over a house had become something much larger and more meaningful, a legacy of protection justice and hope for families facing similar challenges. Have you ever had to choose between seeking revenge and seeking justice? Sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't against our enemies, but against our own desire for retribution. My grandmother taught me that the most powerful victory isn't defeating the people who hurt you. It's protecting others from being hurt in the same way. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear about the power of family forgiveness and the importance of standing up for vulnerable people in our communities. Hit that like button if you believe that ordinary people can fight back against corruption and win. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places and turning personal pain into positive change. Thank you for listening to my grandmother's story and mine. May you always have the courage to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible, and may you find healing through helping others along the way.